your paycheck is lying to you. The number on it goes up every year, but what it actually buys has been quietly shrinking for over 2 decades. Since 2000, cumulative inflation has eaten through 80% of the dollar's value, while median wages have barely kept pace. Today, I'm breaking down exactly how much purchasing power you've lost, where it went, and why nobody in charge wants to talk about it. Starting with the number that should make you angry. The headline claim. Here's a stat that should ruin your morning. Middle wage workers saw their hourly wages grow 6% from 1979 to 2013, 6%, over 34 years. Meanwhile, the top 1% enjoyed a 138% surge over the same period. That's not a gap, that's a different economy entirely, but let's narrow the window. Since 2000, the consumer price index climbed from roughly 172 to 311. That's an 80.7% increase in the cost of basically everything. Your rent, your groceries, your medical bills, all of it 80% more expensive. Now here's where it gets ugly. Nominal wage growth for median earners over that same stretch, around 75%. Prices outran your paycheck every single year, and that gap never closed. That's not stagnation. That's a slow motion heist happening in plain sight. Real average hourly earnings dropped 0.7% from May 2025 to May 2026. Your boss gave you a raise and inflation ate it before you could spend it. You're not falling behind because you're lazy. You're falling behind because the math was rigged before you clocked in. But if the inflation numbers already look this bad on the surface, wait until you hear how they're actually measured. Because the way the government calculates inflation might be the biggest lie of all. The measurement lie. Here's something that should make you angry. The number your government uses to measure inflation, the Consumer Price Index, is designed to make inflation look smaller than it actually is, and I can prove it. The CPI uses something called hedonic quality adjustment. Sounds complicated, but it's simple. If your new car costs 10% more than last year's model but has Bluetooth now, the CPI says the car didn't actually get more expensive. The Bluetooth is worth that extra cost, apparently. So officially, no inflation. Meanwhile, you're staring at a higher number on the sticker and your bank account doesn't care about Bluetooth. Now, the BLS claims hedonic adjustments have a negligible net effect on the overall index. Some items get adjusted down, others up, and it roughly cancels out. But the principle is what matters. The framework exists to redefine more expensive as better value, and that philosophy bleeds into every methodological choice they make. But here's where it gets worse. 24% of CPI's shelter measurement uses something called owner's equivalent rent. Instead of tracking what homes actually cost, it models what homeowners would hypothetically pay to rent their own house, which is, not a real number that exists anywhere. Medical care makes up only 8% of CPI's basket. If you're over 65, healthcare eats 18% of your budget. The index literally isn't measuring your life and the whole basket. It lags reality by up to 18 months. When spending shifts rapidly, like during any economic shock, CPI is still measuring last year's economy. Your grocery receipt knows the truth. The CPI is just pretending not to see it, but if you think the measurement is bad, wait until you see what it's hiding about housing specifically. Housing. Housing is where the entire CPI argument falls apart, and I can prove it with one number. The gap between what the government says rent increased and what renters actually paid from 2000 to 2024 is 27 percentage points. That's not a rounding error. That's a measurement system that fundamentally does not reflect reality. Here's how it breaks down. Actual rent payments increased 65% from 2000 to 2024. The CPI's owner's equivalent rent component, which is supposed to track shelter costs, rose only 38%. That 27-point divergence means every single time someone told you inflation is only 3%, they were using a number that systematically undercounted the biggest expense in your life, and the damage is brutal. Median renter households spent $22,000 annually on housing in 2024, eating up 43% of their income. In 2000, that number was $15,000, which was 29% of income. So renters lost 14 percentage points of their paycheck to housing in just 2 decades. 52% of all renters are now officially cost-burdened, up from 43% 20 years ago, more than half. Cool, that's fine. But here's where it gets truly grim. The median home price to income ratio climbed from 3.0 in 2000 to 5.4 in 2024. California hit 9.1, which is, not ideal. That means the typical buyer went from needing 3 years of gross income to cover a home price to needing nearly 5.5. In the hottest markets, you're looking at almost a decade of earnings just for the sticker price, before interest, taxes, or actually eating food. That's not a housing market. That's a generational gate that slammed shut while everyone was arguing about avocado toast. Homeownership didn't get harder. It became mathematically impossible for most people without inherited wealth, and the inflation number pretended it wasn't happening. But if you think shelter costs are bad, wait until you see what happened to the 2 things that were supposed to be your way out. Healthcare and education, These two categories are where lifetime wealth goes to die, not slowly, not gracefully, violently, and without warning. Let's start with healthcare, because the numbers are genuinely unhinged. Per person healthcare spending in the United States was $5,500 in 2000. In 2024, that number hit $13,500. That's a 145% increase, nearly double the rate of overall inflation. And here's the thing, CPI says medical costs grew 91% in that same window. But out-of-pocket expenses grew 111% because insurers quietly shifted costs onto consumers through higher deductibles and copays. So the official number is already bad and the real number is worse. Employer-sponsored family health insurance premiums surged 212% since 2000. Wages grew 40%. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. A single hospital day now costs right at $200. That's 22% of median annual income. In 2000, it was $1,450, about 14% of income. So getting sick went from financial setback to potential bankruptcy event in less than a generation. A year of insulin now costs 12 weeks of median wages. It used to cost 6. For doing nothing wrong, for having a pancreas that doesn't work. Now education, the supposed escape route, public 4-year tuition increased 169% since 2000, general inflation rose 80%, the CPI education component rose 15%. So even the government's own category-specific measurement can't keep up with what colleges actually charge. You need the degree to earn more, but earning more barely covers what you borrowed to get it. Student debt crossed $1.8 trillion. That's not a safety net. That's a trap with a diploma attached. But if you think these costs are brutal on a monthly budget, wait until you see what happened to the things you buy every single week. Food and energy. Here's the thing about CPI, it loves to smooth everything into these nice, gentle annual curves. 3% here, 4% there, looks manageable on a graph. But your grocery bill doesn't work in annual averages. Your grocery bill works in, I just spent $40 on what used to cost $25, and I'm standing in the checkout line doing math I shouldn't have to do. Food at home prices climbed 56% from 2000 to 2024. That's the average. Meat went up 70%, dairy 65%, and CPI just quietly folds those numbers into a yearly average and moves on as if your budget has the luxury of averaging anything. But here's where it gets real. In 2022, bread prices jumped 18% in a single year. That's the largest spike since 1979. Not over a decade, not gradually, 1 year. Eggs doubled in price over a matter of months. Your paycheck didn't double. Your rent didn't have to compensate. You just ate the cost, literally and financially. And then there's gas. Gasoline surged 150% since 2000, pushing average weekly fuel costs from $25 to $62 for anyone commuting a standard 30 miles. That's an extra $37 a week that doesn't go toward savings, doesn't go toward groceries, doesn't go toward anything except getting to the job that isn't paying you enough to cover the gas it takes to get there. Energy expenses now eat 6.8% of household budgets versus 5.3% in 2000, which is, not ideal. But the number that actually made me pause during research, a gallon of milk cost 1.2 hours of median wages in 2000. Today it requires 1.8 hours. That's a 50% increase in labor time for the same gallon of milk. Not a fancier milk, not organic oat milk with adaptogens. The same milk. You just work longer for it now. CPI calls this manageable inflation. Your refrigerator disagrees. But if food and fuel prices feel like forces of nature, wait until you see the deliberate decisions that made all of this possible. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. The policy decisions. Everything we've talked about so far, the housing, the healthcare, the groceries, none of it happened by accident. These aren't mysterious market forces or inevitable economic cycles. These are the direct, traceable consequences of decisions made by identifiable people in identifiable buildings. Here's the thing. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates at an average of 3.5% from 2000 to 2007. Then after 2008, they dropped them to an average of 1.5% for over a decade. And here's where it gets dark. Every 1% reduction in interest rates historically increased home prices by 6.5%, but wages only responded by 0.8%. So when the Fed slashed rates to stimulate the economy, what they actually stimulated was asset prices for people who already owned assets. Everyone else just watched houses get more expensive. But wait, it gets better. The Fed's balance sheet went from $0.9 trillion in 2008 to $9 trillion by 2026. $9 trillion pumped into the financial system through quantitative easing. We're saving the economy, they said. Cool, except the top 10% of Americans hold 89% of all stocks. So when you flood the system with money and it inflates equity prices by 350%, you've essentially performed a wealth transfer from workers to shareholders and called it economic policy. Which is, not ideal. Meanwhile, the real federal minimum wage fell 17% from 2000 to 2024 because Congress couldn't be bothered to adjust it more than twice in 24 years. Corporate stock buybacks surged from $300 billion annually in 2000 to $1.2 trillion in 2024. That's $1.2 trillion that companies chose to funnel to shareholders instead of paying their workers more. But the market sets wages. Sure, the market also had $9 trillion in free money propping it up. I don't know what to tell you. Low rates inflated assets, QE inflated portfolios, buybacks extracted value from labor, minimum wage adjustments were ignored. Each decision individually defensible, together they built a system where owning things makes you rich and working for a living makes you poorer every single year. If you think that's bad, wait until you see what all of this means for anyone actually trying to save money. The savings trap. Here's the brutal math no one wants to talk about. Parking your money in a traditional savings account isn't just useless, it actually makes you poorer every year. When inflation is running at 4.2% and your savings account yields barely 1%, you're losing 3.2% of your money's real value annually. That's like watching $320 vanish every single year for every $10,000 you put away. Now take $10,000 saved back in 2000. After 80% cumulative inflation over 2 decades, that stash is only worth about $5,800 in 2 days spending power. Basically, nearly half evaporated while it sat safe in the bank. If you've been diligent about saving $500 every month since 2000, you'd have roughly $150,000 nominally by 2024. Sounds good, right? But adjust that for inflation, and it only buys what $82,000 could in $2,000. So your hard-earned cash is nearly halved just by sitting still. Here's where it gets worse. The classic 4% rule for retirement income now demands 18% more saved principal than 2 decades ago just to generate the same inflation-adjusted spending money. The math means workers today must sock away 83% more every month than those in 2000 just to keep pace with what past retirees enjoyed. So all those old-school financial tips about steady saving, they're obsolete. The crushing reality is that inflation's silent erosion means your money must work harder, or you have to save a whole lot more just to stand still. And that's why the savings trap is the grand finale of everything we've covered, showing how income stagnation, rising costs, and poor returns combine into one devastating problem nobody ever warned you about. If you think $500 a month sounds like a manageable habit, it's actually a mountain you're climbing blind, because the ground keeps slipping away beneath your feet. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.